That wasn't my song, but Smash Mouth works, you know. Hey, thanks for coming. Everyone has been asking me if we're going to do exercise after lunch again, and I don't have like the cool confidence that Ben had, so we're not going to. Sorry, I'm talking about GraphQL in real life, and I plan for this to be like real, like a fine documentary, because I've been working on GraphQL for my product for a while, but it's turned out to be more like real, like reality TV. So bear with me. My name's Cameron Matheson. I work at Instructure. And at Instructure, I work on this product, Canvas, which you might have used if you've been in school in the last 5 or 10 years. Canvas is cool because it's open source. You can get it on GitHub. But like, other than being open source, it tries to be like open in general. So like, it's really extensible by our customers. And all the features we do are against this like open, publicly documented API. The API is like really comprehensive. People should be able to like get or manipulate their data basically any way we do as we develop the app. And so I've been working here for 6 years, and I've been building the API and consuming the API and trying to fix performance issues in the API. And what I've noticed is like, as a product, I'm shaking, guys, sorry. As like product people would come talk to me about new features they wanted and stuff, or like break out in a cold sweat, you know, because I was nervous about like the impact to all the pages I work on, or I'd feel like this irrational anger building up in me. And I think that's a sign that like REST is not all it's cracked up to be. So I was lucky to go to the inaugural React.js conference at Facebook, and that was, we had React Native and all that cool stuff, but the thing that like actually blew my mind was Dan Schaefer and Jing Chun's preview of GraphQL and Relay. And just a few minutes in, I could see like they had solved all these problems I was having with my REST API, like overfetching and paginating subcollections and just all these things I was dealing with in a super elegant way, and I wanted it really bad, but it was just a preview, right? They weren't releasing anything. So one of the Facebook engineers was nice enough to talk to me at dinner about how this is working for them, and he was telling me, this is a dinner conversation from years ago, so don't trust me on this at all, but he was telling me, right, they have like this proprietary graph database, and as they're receiving these GraphQL queries, they're like spawning up these parallel executors to traverse this GraphQL tree. And this conversation was like awe-inspiring because it was like such cool technology, and soul-crushing because it didn't sound like anything I was going to be able to do at my Rails Postgres shop. So that leads me to my first question I have about GraphQL. Do I need some kind of fancy pants graph database to use GraphQL? And actually you don't. So this became really apparent when the actual release of GraphQL happened. You might remember it was like GraphQL came out, which is the cool front end for query editing. And the demo was like you could run queries in GraphQL that were hitting some Star Wars REST API. So you could like compare the mass of Chewbacca against Luke Skywalker, whatever Star Wars nerds do. It was super cool, and I think the lesson we could have drawn from like this GraphQL as a middleman to a REST API thing was like, hey, GraphQL is super flexible and it doesn't care how you store your data. But I think the lesson most of us took was like, oh, let's just stick GraphQL in front of our REST API. And I'm trying to be like super nuanced about this, and I'm having a hard. I think this is a tragic way to do it. GraphQL like is super beneficial to front-end developers, and I think we're all sold on that. But the same benefits that apply to the front end can also apply to the back end. Specifically, like, we don't want the backend like serving up all this delicious data and then just leave it on the table at the middleman stage. So ideally, we just want to not produce data that's not requested by clients. So I think the best way to do GraphQL is like do it as a first-class API. So there's like, I think a lot of confusion about what GraphQL does when you're new to it. You see lots of questions like, how do I do authentication in GraphQL, or authorization, or how do I do search in GraphQL? And GraphQL actually doesn't care about any of that. It's just a really simple query language that's made up of types, which are like data types, and resolvers. Resolvers are functions that provide data to your types. And that's really all it is. So I promised GraphQL for real, so we're just gonna do it. I thought, like, I've been working on GraphQL at work, and so I thought I would like pull in some real life stuff I've done. But really what I want everyone to take away from this is like, go build your own GraphQL API. So we're just going to do it from scratch in Canvas, which is like an existing gigantic, you know, we suffer from a lot of like the enterprise problems that Jennifer was talking about in her talk. But it's easy to add GraphQL, at least in a really naive way. Excuse me, we're gonna do that. So this is a GraphQL schema, and you can see it's like types all the way down. The top is always a query type, and my only entry point in that is this all courses thing, which returns a list of courses. And courses return, you know, ID name. You can get a list of assignments. So this is really straightforward. Assignments have submissions. Those represent, like, you know, when a student hands in homework, that's a submission. A submission has a submitting user and a score, and a user has a name. So that's a GraphQL schema right there. And we can try to, oh, by the way, how is this font size? Is that good in the back? Bigger. Is that big enough? Color's okay? Okay. All right. So here is graphical. And if we run like an empty, let's run a query. So we get nothing back, and that's great. Like the schema works. We didn't get anything because we didn't write any resolvers yet. So let's do that. Depending on like what environment you're doing your GraphQL server, and you might write like this schema language directly, or in Ruby, which is what I'm using. There's a DSL to do it. But either way, you have resolve functions, and these are just like regular functions. You can do anything you want. So you could hit a REST API. You could use your existing like database or whatever. You could just return, this is new, like new data if you wanted. Oh. By the way, Canvas is really big and reloading takes a second, which didn't feel that long until I was in front of like 500 people. So bear with me. Anyway, yeah, thank you. So let's load some real data though. I have this context object that I pass around in GraphQL, and it has my logged in user. So we'll just actually load that user's courses. By the way, this like blank side pane is going to be a list of queries that run. So let's do this again. Okay, so there's some courses, and it ran a query. So that looks great. One thing interesting to note here is like we got a name that's like actually filled out, even though we didn't write a resolver for a name. And the reason for that is like most GraphQL implementations are going to provide a default resolver for you. So it's going to call a method with that field or access a property with that field name for you. So actually my GraphQL schema here follows my Canvas data model really closely, so I can go all the way with this thing. let's see what we got here, submissions, and then we'll get username. So this would be like a good query to run if I was trying to, if I was a teacher and I wanted to see the grades for all of my students' homework assignments or something. And I can run that. Oh, so that looked horrible. And this is like really the problem you run into early on with GraphQL is it's like n+1 queries out of control. And we get n+1 queries with our REST API on more often than I'd like to admit basis. But they're typically pretty easy to find and fix. You know, you find where you're loading data badly, and then you load it better. So I'm loading it right here, and preload. We're just going to load it better. So we'll preload all of our stuff. User. Okay, I think that's going to work. This delay, guys. Ooh. Okay. Oh yeah. So that looked fantastic. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 queries for 4 data types. I'm super happy with that. The problem is, if we do this, we're still doing those same 4 queries, but we only asked for courses. So we're over fetching. We're not presenting too much data, but we're doing too much work on the server. So let's talk about why that is. When a GraphQL queries are a tree. I wanted to do a tree diagram of this part, and I didn't have time. And after seeing Shirley's talk, I'm glad I didn't, because her visualizations were super cool. So like as you traverse it's going to go down in breadth first order. So we're doing one level of the tree at a time. So we're going to resolve all courses, and that gives us a list of course objects. Then we're going to iterate over our courses, and for each one we're going to get our name and our list of assignments. Then we're going to move on to the next one and do our name and our list of assignments. So this assignments call is the problem, right? Like we're going to actually execute a query here. And we don't have any context to grab the other courses assignments at the same time. And so the solution to this is actually like really simple, and I feel like it should have been obvious, but it never would have occurred to me. And that's like to batch load these things by not doing any work up front. So essentially, instead of returning a list of assignments right here, we want to return like a to-do and be like, hey, when you're loading assignments, load them for this course too. So let's just see what that looks like. And I'm going to switch to, whoa, really? Okay, I'm going to do some live Git instead of some live coding right now. Okay, something is not right here, guys. Whew. Okay, Gina. There we go. I want that, and we're going to do a little bit of that. Whew. Bear with me. Okay, thanks. I lost my syntax highlighting. We're gonna try this again. React Rally schema. This went so good when I was practicing in my hotel room. All right, so I pulled in when I was doing my Git stuff. I pulled in this association loader, which is a GraphQL batch thing. This is the Ruby equivalent of data loader, which is what you'll use in Node, or there's stuff in whatever language you're using. So it is not too interesting to look at this, but the perform thing here is what we give it a list of things we want to load data for, and we do it all in one go. But the interesting part is using it. So let's do that. So courses is just going to care about courses now, and then assignments is where we want to batch load these things. So we're going to start giving it a resolve function. And before, we were using the default resolver, which is calling course.assignments. So instead of doing that, we're going to use this association loader we just made. And we're going to, this course assignments thing is just a grouping. So this is the bucket I'm putting stuff into to batch load. And now we're going to load our course. And we have to do that a bunch more times. So I'm going to copy them. All right, let's try it. So, okay, there we go. So this looks exactly like it did before, which in this case is good because I liked the query before when I was loading all my data. The real test is going to be doing something like this. Now we're only loading courses and assignments, so we want to see 2 queries. Thanks. All right, that was super fast, and two queries. So that's beautiful. Thanks. Okay, so that's how you need to do GraphQL, is like make sure to batch load. And so data loader in JavaScript, GraphQL batch is good in Ruby. There's a new one that just came out that also looks cool. But I think my takeaway for GraphQL mostly is like, please don't just do the REST API backing a GraphQL proxy thing unless you have to, because we want like the whole organization to benefit from GraphQL. And I've been having super fun doing it. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I meant to set a timer. Can someone like, doing good. Okay, thank you. So this went much faster at the hotel, like I was saying. I'm going to give you more opinions. One of the first things you're going to come into when you do GraphQL is you've got to choose between like Apollo and Relay, right? These are like your 2 main client libraries. And they're both fantastic. I would say Relay offers like some great conventions that I think you should follow even if you do go with Apollo. That's to give you like flexibility in the future, but also they just make sense. The most burdensome Relay convention is like the global identifier for every object. If you're like coming from a Rails shop like me, most of your IDs are just like simple counters. So every, like assignments have like 1 through 1 million and users have 1 through 1 million. That doesn't work with Relay. So instead, like what they suggest is concatenating your type and your ID. And that works fine, except when you're integrating GraphQL into an existing application, it can be burdensome to require people to have these global identifiers everywhere. So I would suggest like letting them, if you're taking an ID for courses or something, don't make them pass in a global ID. Let them pass in a global ID, or take the old school ID. And that's been helpful for me. So this really is the end. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy GraphQL as much as I have.